Picture a little boy named Peter. He is absolutely obsessed with this scratchy, old giant ape movie from 1933. He's out there in his backyard, building his own tiny, raggedy creature out of whatever he can scrounge up, filming it with a clunky old camera just to see if he can make it move. It's pretty wild to think about, right? Because that little kid wandering around with a camera grew up to be a massively famous director, but he never ever shook that dream of the giant ape.
But, dreams are weird. Sometimes they just break your heart before they actually come true. Back in 1996, he finally started making his ape movie. He had the drawings ready, the story fleshed out, and then the studio just completely backed out. Canceled. Completely brutal. But Peter just casually pirated. He was like, cool, I'll go make The Lord of the Rings instead. Which, just happened to become some of the most wildly successful movies ever made.
So, obviously, the studio comes crawling back. They toss a monstrous budget at him. We're talking something like $200 million. But Peter was beautifully stubborn about the whole thing. He knew his creature couldn't just be some cold, simple computer monster. That just wouldn't work. He wanted a real face. He wanted deep scars, a heavy history, and real beating feelings. Which means becoming the giant. Enter Andy Serkis. Andy was already this total legend at playing strange creatures, but this was different. Andy just throws himself into it with this intense, crazy dedication. He's traveling out to zoos, trekking out into the wild, just obsessively studying how real gorillas move, how they sit, how fiercely they protect their families. But here's the wild thing Andy discovered out there. Gorillas aren't these screaming movie monsters. They're actually incredibly quiet, gentle creatures. To capture that quietness, they used motion capture. Basically, Andy wore this special suit covered in tiny dots. And if you think about it, those tracking dots are exactly like mapping tiny constellations in the night sky, each little point of light connecting to form a larger, living shape on the computer. So Andy didn't just pretend. He used his entire body to act out these deep, heavy feelings. He would even strap on these massive, heavy weights while he rehearsed, just to force his body to figure out the strange, lumbering walks of a real, massive animal. He was unhurried about it, just letting the heavy weight of the character sink deep into his bones. Now imagine being Naomi Watts for a second. She's playing Anne Darrow, and she is out there having to act her absolute heart out to empty space. Literally nothing. It was completely surreal for her. Until Andy was like, okay, let me help. And he just climbs up on this insanely tall ladder in his weird suit, making these booming gorilla sounds, just to give her a real, breathing presence to look at and react to. And it worked perfectly. Their genuine, weird little friendship on set completely gave this digital creature a human heart. That real connection is what made their scenes feel so beautifully natural, which they desperately needed, because Peter was about to drop them into Skull Island, this dangerously dark, absolute nightmare of a jungle crawling with giant creatures. The contrast here is just wild. They built these massive, sprawling physical sets out in New Zealand, and then seamlessly stitched them together with these colossal, computer-generated digital island expansions. But the golden rule was that all those giant digital dinosaurs still had to move and breathe like real, heavy animals. Which leads to this absolutely wild setup for the massive battle. You've got Andy Serkis throwing himself around, fighting 3 imaginary dinosaurs using these goofy, simple little props. And then the computer artists take that raw emotion and spend an unbelievable amount of weeks, just exhausting weeks, turning that chaotic dance into a fight that genuinely shakes the ground. But the real nightmare for the team was the fur. Millions of tiny hairs. Computer hair is notoriously difficult, so the artist had to literally invent special tools just to make it move naturally. Because honestly, rendering all that digital fur reacting to wind and rain is like trying to track millions of blades of grass in a hurricane. It's beautifully chaotic and almost impossible. But they pulled it off, creating this dirty, rain-swept fur that made him look exactly like what he was, an old, scarred fighter. He had broken features and this incredibly weary look in his eyes. Meanwhile, Peter is just working endlessly long hours, somehow keeping his mind wrapped around thousands of these incredibly complicated moving pieces. Of course, the studio starts totally sweating. The production was becoming enormously expensive, and they were getting super nervous. It forced Peter into this painful corner where he actually had to rip out certain scenes he loved, just to keep the sheer weight of this giant story moving forward so it didn't completely slow down. And they still had to build an entire city. They needed to perfectly recreate an old version of New York City, so they built what they called bigatures. These were incredibly detailed miniature buildings that the cameras could swoop right through. Working with these bigatures was exactly like a giant meticulously crafting his absolute dream model train set. Every tiny brick and window was just perfect. Then the whole vibe of the story dramatically shifts. The creature is ripped from his island, dragged to New York, and treated as property, captured and controlled. Until, of course, he breaks absolutely free. He goes tearing through the streets, desperately searching for Anne, and suddenly you realize just how massive he is when the cars next to him look totally tiny. But then, everything just goes quiet. They finally find each other in the middle of all that chaos on this quiet, frozen pond, and it's this incredibly hushed, magical moment. They're just sliding on the ice, sharing this profound emotional understanding without a single word of language. And all of this leads to that heartbreaking climax at the Empire State Building. Andy was just pouring out pure, exhausted emotion, showing fear, profound sadness, and real love. And the computer artists were able to perfectly, flawlessly copy those raw feelings straight onto the giant ape's face. The airplanes attack. And you just watch him grow weaker and weaker. He takes one final devastating look at his friend, and then comes that tragic fall that completely shatters the audience's heart. You just want to save him, but you can't. Behind the scenes, it was also a total race against time. The original composer actually left super late in the game, creating this wild musical emergency. So they bring in James Newton Howard, and the guy has just a few weeks to write an entire score that is somehow brilliantly sad, totally terrifying, and incredibly exciting all at once. When the filmmakers finally finished, after years of this grinding, passionate work, the relief was just palpable. And the crazy thing? The childhood dream was completed, and it worked. Audiences were literally sitting in dark theaters crying over a digital creature because he looked and felt so remarkably real and so deeply sad. And the payoff was huge. We're talking over $500 million at the box office, 3 Oscars. But the real breakthrough was Andy proving that a computer character pulls its absolute best, most undeniable magic directly from real, messy human acting. The visual effects team completely rewrote the rulebook on what digital skin and hair could actually do. They pushed boundaries, taught other filmmakers completely new tricks, and most importantly, they deeply, beautifully honored that scratchy 1933 original that first sparked a little boy's imagination. Because at the end of the day, it was never really about the digital effects. It's about a lonely creature violently taken from his home. It's this quiet reminder that the things that look the most frightening are often just terrified themselves, just trying to protect the very few things they love. It's crazy that all that movie magic began with just one small, stubborn dream, and a guy refusing to let a failed project stay dead. Kind of makes you wonder, what old impossible dream of yours is just waiting for you to dust it off? Anyway, if you had fun wandering through this giant story with me, definitely drop a like, hit share, and subscribe so we can keep hanging out. Catch you on the next one.